Mark chapter 6, verse 45. So he's basically telling the disciples, I want you to get in the boat, and I want you to go to the other side. The disciples are kind of restraining, like, I don't want to go into the boat. And here's the reason why, is because they're fishermen. They can read the weather forecast. I mean, you ever see farmers where they could just read as far as, oh, it's gonna rain in about an hour. You look, yeah, right, and then it rains an hour later. I mean, these guys are just good. They can telegraph as far as, the weather forecast. They don't need the Doppler, Channel 7 Doppler. They don't need that. I need that. Go to verse 45. It says, and immediately he made his disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side to Bethsaida, while he himself was sending the multitude away. And after bidding them farewell, he departed to the mountain to pray. And when it was evening, the boat was in the midst of the sea, and he was alone on the land. And seeing them straining at the oars, for the wind was against them, and at about the fourth hour or fourth watch of the night, he came to them, walking on the sea, and he intended to pass by them. And when they saw him walking on the sea, they supposed that it was a ghost. And they cried out, for they all saw him and were frightened. But immediately he spoke with them and said to them, take courage, it is I, do not be afraid. Verse 51, and he got into the boat with them, and the wind stopped, and they were greatly astonished. Look at verse 52. For they had not gained any insight from the incident of the loaves. Their heart was hardened. There was a miracle right before this. It was the loaves, where he fed everybody, and they totally forgot about it. I'm just telling you right now, this is what should have happened. They should have seen Jesus walk in the water, seen the wind, seen everything, and just say, you know what? God's going to come through. Look, God came through just a little while ago. He took a little boy's lunch and and fed thousands from it. If God can do that, then guess what? God's going to save us, and God's going to be with us. We're fine. We're okay. That's what should have happened. But it didn't happen. Why? Because they didn't remember. Guys, when tough times hit, start remembering what he did. I'll prove it again. Go to Mark chapter 8. Just one or two chapters later, watch. In Mark chapter 8. Look at verse 14. And they had forgotten to take bread and did not have more. Look at them, one loaf in the boat with them. So they didn't have a whole lot. Look what Jesus says. And he was giving orders to them, saying, watch out, be aware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. In other words, he's basically saying, Herod was a political view. He was a king. And so you know what Jesus is saying? I want you to be careful from politics. Just be careful there. Just be careful. In other words, be careful what they're saying. And then he says, be careful of the Pharisees. In other words, that religious teaching that doesn't do any good. So politically, the religious system at that time, he's basically saying, I don't want you to pay attention to that. But look what he says. He says, verse 16, and they began to discuss with one another the fact that they had no bread. So they're just totally missing as far as what Jesus is saying. Jesus is talking about incorrect teaching, and they're thinking about bread. But let's just go a little further. Verse 17, and Jesus, aware of this, he said to them, why do you discuss the fact that you have no bread? He says, do you not yet see or understand? Do you have, look what he says, a hardened heart? So you can have a hardened heart. Verse 18, he says, having eyes, do you not see? Having ears, do you not hear? And look what he says, and do you not remember? Verse 19, when I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, and how many baskets full of broken pieces you picked up? And look what he says, 12. Verse 20, and when I broke the 7 for the 4,000, how many large baskets full of broken pieces? He says, did you pick up? And they said, 7. In verse 21, he says, and he was saying to them, do you not understand? In other words, they forgot about what God had done previously. And I'll tell you something. You know what could put you in a slump? What could make you depressed? You know what can get you out of that? Just remember what God did. Amen. Once again, here's my only point. The power of remembering what God did gives life to your future. It really does. It really does. You know, I remember when when I seen it with my own eyes. I remember I seen a woman that was healed. And she was born with one foot. One foot was larger than the other. And I remember seeing her foot just grow out like this. And I remember seeing that, and I was like, wow, God, you did something powerful. That was great. And I remember the Lord was just telling me, don't ever forget that. Don't ever forget that. And as I kept on remembering, it gave life for me to go and pray for people that were sick. And as I did that, I began to see people healed. I began to see people just, at one time, had cancer, had no cancer. And it was all because I never forgot. Guys, I want you to think, I'm doing this on purpose. I want you to think of a moment. I don't care if you say, thank you, Lord God, for putting a roof over my head, for putting food on the table, for giving me a job. Whatever it is, if it's any of those or something else, I want you to do something. This is the way we're going to end up. I want you to go to the neighbor next to you, and I want you to tell that person what God did for you. Ready? Think about it. Just think about it. Think about what God did. I remember financially, we were thinking about, as far as, Lord God, how are we going to get out of this? You know, I mean, you make bad decisions in the past and you get credit cards, you know, I mean, that was me. That was, but you know what? We prayed. My wife prayed. We said, you know what, this year, I want to get out of debt. I'm going to tell you something. Do you know that in one moment time, somebody gave us a personal check to where we were like 90% out of debt at that time? Like that. Like that. Can you snap your fingers like that? Right? Like that. Guys, you know what I remember? I remember my father-in-law being healed. He had a back issue that was bad. In a cane for years. And in a moment's time, look, he got healed. He's exercising, he's doing things that he's never done before. Healed. I remember that. And you know what that remembering does? It gives life. It gives life to us. You know what? Because if God did it then, God's going to do it again. I want you to turn to the neighbor next to you and tell them. And remember, just tell them about this is what God did. Ready? Go. It could be groups of 2 or 3, doesn't matter. Just tell somebody.